Thank you, Senator DeLeon, for those inspiring words. We all know we have a lot of work to do, but we share your enthusiasm. This can be done. It must be done. Wanted to move on to the next segment of the conference here, and it really gives me a lot of pleasure to introduce our next speaker. You know, I've known Secretary Rodriquez for several years now, and it's been a real pleasure to work with him. You know, in his background, you know, as a lawyer, he spent a good share of his career, you know, with the California Department of Justice, rising up to Deputy Attorney General. But since 2011, Governor Brown tapped him to be the California Secretary for Environmental Protection. I will emphasize California, although as the comments were rustling through the crowd, there may be an opening at the national level soon, so who knows, there may be possibilities. But, you know, with that appointment, you know, Secretary Rodriquez was assigned a daunting task to oversee the activities of 6 boards, departments, and offices within the agency, including the California Air Resources Board and the State Water Resources Control Board, which we all know are just, you know, minor activities that certainly don't take up much of his time. But through it all, Secretary Rodriquez has provided enormous leadership and has brought us to where we are today, and yet at this stage continues to look forward. So without further ado, Secretary Matt Rodriquez.
Well, thank you very much. Actually, after the inspiring speech we just heard, you know, I can't even begin to try and follow up on that. So what I'm going to do is invite some other panelists up here to talk a little bit about what's going on in other parts of the world. So I'd like to bring up the Honorable Chris Lee from Hawaii in the House of Representatives, and Josie Hickel, the president of the Chugach Commercial Holdings, and also Ray Williams from PG&E. And while they're moving up, let me just say that I will be talking a little bit about the summit that is going on. Come on up. I'll be talking a little bit about the summit that the governor will be holding in San Francisco at the end of, or in the middle of September. But I wanted to bring the panelists up here right now, and in particular, I wanted to give Representative Lee an opportunity to speak because he has a flight to catch soon. And as I said, you've already heard all about California from Senator DeLeon, who captured, I think, the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish perfectly here today. I can't even begin to recite all the statistics that he seems to have memorized about the benefits of the California economy, how we're getting jobs in clean tech. So you've heard about California. Let me, you know, what we'll do is, why don't you move there so people can see you? I'm going to move this room. Okay, yeah. Okay, we're going to move the podium. And what I'd like to do is start with a video that will show the California summit and talk a little bit about the summit. And then we'll turn to a video that we've got from Representative Lee from Hawaii and hear a little bit about what's going on in Hawaii.
First myth is that there is a trade-off between choosing to do something to improve climate and your growth or your profits. Everything that our group of companies have done to try and improve energy or to reduce greenhouse gases has actually given us a return.
We need big bold solutions.
Look, it's up to you and it's up to me and tens of millions of other people to get it together, to roll back the forces of carbonization and join together to combat the existential threat of climate change. That's why we're having the Climate Action Summit in San Francisco, September 2018. Come join us.
Hard to follow up on that. There's a building momentum. That's what this is all about. Let's do this. As I said, Representative Lee has to leave here to catch a plane. So I wanted to give him an opportunity to talk about what's going on in Hawaii right now. And I believe there's another video that he has that talks about some of the progress that was alluded to by Senator De Leon. And we'll give the representative a chance to talk a little bit about Hawaii before he has to run off and catch a plane. So if we could run the video about Hawaii now. And it's always pleasant to see videos about Hawaii.
The great thing about this country is that we've always been a leader on the world stage. And right now, we've been a tremendous leader on renewable energy. But other countries are picking up that torch and running.
The sooner that we made that commitment to 100% renewable, I think the more aligned we would be as a community in really striving for those decisions that are in the best interest of everybody.
The 100% RPS is a key state policy, and it really sets the framework for the electricity sector and the industry. So it really is an enabler. It provides certainty, and it is the legislative and regulatory framework that provides clarity.
We here in Hawaii feel the effects of climate change. We've lost 17 miles of beaches, accelerated by sea level rise. We're seeing our fresh water supply dry up. We're seeing more frequent hurricanes. And all of this, I think, gives us both a moral and ethical obligation to do what we can here in our backyard to move toward cleaner renewables.
As a business leader, I'm looking at the dollars and cents. And I may say, you know, going 100% renewable today, it might cost us something, but I see that as an investment. I see that as an investment for the future. In fact, our buyers are asking, do you have PV on our rooftops? It's part of their buying decision.
We were at that point in the energy status of the state that important investment decisions would be made. And 100% was very critical in steering those decisions to the right ones. And that translates to real jobs, real investment opportunities, and real opportunities for research and development and being a leader in these areas. And I think that we're beginning to see all of those things happen.
You know, I think even to our surprise, this bill has really catalyzed everyone getting together. I think everybody from the utilities to the developers to the public is on board with 100% renewable energy.
Having an ambitious goal of 100% clean energy for a state has attracted outside investment. And again, as an island state, it's important that we continue to attract that investment into Hawaii.
Unions, and more specifically the IBEW, have been a part of the utility industry from the beginning. It's important that we adapt to the changes in the industry, and we can either decide to be part of the change or we can be left behind, which ultimately hurts our members.
The most important thing I think it brings is a team together, and the community coming together to work towards a single goal, and everyone finding their role in getting us there is the biggest win.
people now see that a clean energy future is a possibility, and I think more and more they're seeing that the impacts of climate change and global warming are accelerating, and the quicker we do it, the better off the planet would be.
Setting a goal of 100% renewable energy ensures that the right projects get pushed forward. I mean, already to date, we've saved over $1/3 billion because of our progress toward 100% renewable energy. It's great for consumers, it's great for our environment here in Hawaii, and it's great for our kids' future, bottom line.
So, Representative Lee, maybe you'd like to talk a little bit more about what's going on in Hawaii and give a little bit of the background for the video we just saw.
Sure. And please no one think I strategically timed my flight so that I could dodge all the hard questions and pass them over here. But I do have to run, unfortunately, to vote on a carbon-related bill and a bunch of other things that are up tomorrow morning for a vote in our legislature. But that said, I really want to touch on just a couple things. And it's really to highlight what's happening in Hawaii, which is, I think, being done in partnership with other states and other countries around the world, like California and like so many others. When it comes to our climate initiatives, we have statutorily, legally committed ourselves to meeting the Paris Agreement and everything that's entailed therein. We're on our way. We've got a great group of folks here from our state, interspersed throughout the crowd. If you guys want to stand up for just a second, I think we were one of the larger delegations that came in. These are the folks that the legislature and our executive branch have tasked with actually solving on the ground our carbon sequestration, climate problems. And they're part of a larger group of folks who've been working on this. We have a climate commission composed of all our directors of all our agencies, all our counties, working together across the entire economy and our entire social strata to figure out how to address this stuff. And so we've been moving on sea level rise and a number of other issues. We've already identified that we're going to be out about $19 billion in infrastructure, in coastal infrastructure in the next few decades. So it's all the more reason for us to make these investments in the right places today to prevent this from happening. We've also been tackling transportation. We passed a law about 3 years ago which says we're going to eliminate fossil fuels completely from ground transportation within our state. That didn't have a year attached to it, but everybody got on board and we've been working on it since. Our mayors from all our counties just came together and committed to, and it sounds really big, we actually only have 4 counties throughout the state, but the mayors from all our counties came together and committed to eliminating fossil fuels from ground transportation by 2045, and doing so in public transportation 10 years earlier by 2035. So all these things are moving along. The third sector that, of course, this video was about was our electricity sector. We've had our 100% RPS on the books for about 3 years now. And we're today, over the last decade, already have doubled, actually tripled, a little bit more than tripled our renewable energy production in Hawaii. And we've got a long way to go yet. We're only at about 30-ish%, so we're even behind where California is today. But we are committed to that future. And for us, what that's already meant, as I mentioned before, is job creation. And I think Kevin hit on this perfectly. In 2016, we created more jobs just in the solar industry in this country than exist in the entire coal industry that exist, period. And to put in perspective, Toys R Us currently employs more people than the entire coal industry. And if you think that that's not likely to change, Toys R Us just went bankrupt. So it's clear that people need to be thinking ahead. And these are the kinds of things that we're trying to lay out in this framework as we move forward. About a quarter of all our building permits in Honolulu were for rooftop solar and other sorts of renewable energy projects at the height of the last recession. I mean, this industry has been a literal economic lifesaver for us in recent years, and we're banking on it to continue to create those higher paying jobs and create that opportunity, which even our Chamber of Commerce and other business interests have really embraced in a big way. And I chose to, this is a video put together by one of our local nonprofits, the Blue Planet Foundation, which does a lot of think tank policy work in the renewable energy space. They've got a great team, and they've really done a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to analysis that that we need as policymakers to be able to justify making these sorts of changes. And what's fascinating, and the reason I really want to show this, is that once we took that step and committed wholly as a state to 100% renewables and to ultimately doing what we need to do to address climate, all the other stakeholders who in the past had either been opposed or not really a part of these discussions came to the table and committed wholeheartedly. Our utilities, our independent project developers, our unions, everyone across the board today has been completely supportive of this. And we've seen polling in the public that's in the high 90s for renewable energy efforts going forward. And this is something which we now as a society have taken on, and we changed the conversation from, is this possible, to how fast can we accomplish it? And what we've seen, even in spite of our law saying we're going to be 100% by 2045, is legitimate due diligence at our utilities and in other stakeholders to really get down into the weeds and figure out how to technically achieve these things. And what they found blew everyone's minds, including my own. And that was that this is not only possible, but it is possible not by 2045, but by even a conservative estimate by 2040 at the latest. And they're doing so at a savings of over $5 billion more than it would take just to keep the status quo with the fossil fuels that we depend on today. It is a huge win and a revelation that the highest echelons of our business community, of our energy community, and everywhere else have come to realize and embrace. And what's really great is that we've started reaching out to partner with other states. We're working with a number of folks, and including other countries, to really show that the steps that we've taken, the limited steps we've taken, can be replicated in other places. And as technology continues to drop prices, we're inevitably going to see the kind of pricing models that work for everybody everywhere. So we're currently in the middle of negotiating and wrapping up a partnership with states in Brazil. We're starting discussions with states in Mexico and other subnational governments around the world, because we can't wait for a federal administration to step up to do this for us. It is on us. And I think that's why it's so important that you have leaders like Kevin in this state who've taken it upon themselves to step up to the plate, to take on difficult challenges, and ultimately do what absolutely needs to be done. Because even if we achieve our 100% renewable goals in all these sectors and tie it together with a formal carbon standard that's going to drop us down to zero in the decades to come, it means absolutely nothing if we're the only ones to do it. Our survival depends on that collaboration and cooperation across the country and around the world. And so I really take my hat off to what you guys are doing in your sectors and what California is doing under your leadership to really make that possible. It's one planet we live on together, and it's on all of us to do something. And I'm so eager to see that there's so much going on here and that we're actually going to achieve it. So thank you.
Well, now you can see why I decided that I wouldn't speak. I would allow him to speak. So I appreciate that. Just one question for you. What sort of impact have you seen on energy costs from your programs?
So we are seeing three things. First and foremost, one, that the resource planning that we had assumed the investments we're going to have to make into transmission and distribution and power plants and all of the stuff in the coming decades is dramatically shifting. That those prices are significantly cheaper by using modern technology and modern rate design and all the other levers and tools that we have available to us now than continuing the status quo. More than that, moving to renewables has already ultimately been able to reduce risk to ratepayers and taxpayers, because you're levelizing a fixed cost rather than relying on volatile fossil fuels and other things coming into the state. And what that's already meant is avoided cost savings. I mentioned it here, about $1/3 billion just for one commodity, which is low sulfur fuel oil alone. When you add on all the other kinds of resources, and we have coal and other things as well, it's significantly more. And of course, the biggest thing is in those years to come, that avoided cost is going to creep into the tens of billions of dollars, which may not sound like a lot for California, but where we are a small island state, it is huge. And that's something which taxpayers and ratepayers and project developers and everybody continue to bring forward, because that is the proof in the pudding that this works.
Well, thank you for the appearance. I wish you well on your votes back in Hawaii. And we'll look forward to continuing to work with Hawaii in the days ahead. And actually, it's a nice segue to what the summit is all about, going back to that original summit. And I don't know if you want to go catch your plane now or not.
I'd rather not, but
okay.
but I should.
Okay.
But thank you so much for having me, and thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Ask these guys the hard questions.
Well, actually, it's a nice segue to the summit, because I do want to talk about that briefly before I turn to Josie and Ray to talk a little bit about what's going on in their areas. Very briefly, when I became the secretary in 2011, we would hear about why is it that California is going off on its own and doing these climate programs. We're only responsible for 1% of the world's emissions. We can't do anything on our own. And at the same time, why are we jeopardizing the California economy? What we realized over time was, well, one, the programs that we had in California were working. Two, they were not jeopardizing the California economy. In fact, as Senator De Leon talked about, it turned out that it was going to be beneficial for the California economy. And so while we had a deficit when the governor became the governor of $27 billion, right now we've got a surplus of $8 billion. And where we had unemployment at 12% in 2010, now we have unemployment that's below 5%. And we do have hundreds of thousands of jobs in the clean tech industry. And that was a very, very good story that responded to some of these concerns. But there really wasn't any focus on those stories, I didn't feel, and we didn't think at the international level. We kept hearing about, well, how can these programs really work? Minister Murray and Senator De Leon and I were in Lima at the UNFCCC conference in 2014, and you still heard that rumbling about, well, can we really make this work? And Paris is very important, and what can we do to provide some momentum to these Paris negotiations? And I think that's where the stories, like you've heard from Senator De Leon about California, from Representative Lee about what's going on in Hawaii, are incredibly important, because they demonstrate that, one, climate programs really do work, and they really do reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We can do something if we work collectively on these issues. Two, you can do it without ruining your economy. In fact, to the contrary, it can be beneficial to your economy. And three, we're not doing it alone. There are regions, states, businesses, investment groups, civil society around the world that are working on programs that are addressing climate change, that are reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So that's what we want to talk about at the summit in September. We want to talk about what's being done on the ground to really show that you can address climate change. And we want to do that in September because in Poland at the end of this year, there will be a stock take to see how countries are doing in meeting their contributions to reduce climate change and address climate change under the Paris Agreement. And what we want to do in this summit is we want to encourage our national governments to have even greater ambition, to look to do even more, because frankly, what's been agreed to in Paris will start us down the road to addressing climate change, but it won't get us to where we need to be to keep climate change below 2 degrees centigrade. So we want to tell these stories about what's going on the ground in Hawaii, in California, in Canada, in Germany, around the world, and also how businesses and investment groups are working collaboratively with us to make sure these programs work. So that's the idea behind the summit. Now I will stop talking myself and turn to Josie, who is responsible for leading strategy and oversight for the Chugach Alaska Corporation. And you're in charge of the commercial business portfolio and land projects. Chugach is a Alaska Native corporation serving the interests of the Alaska Native people of the Chugach region. Josie comes to us with a bachelor's degree in business management and human resources, but she's also a lifelong Alaskan. She's of Aleut descent and has a very interesting story to talk about what they're doing in Alaska. And I think we've got a video to introduce your talk as well, right?
Right, thank you. So before we start the video, I just want to cue it up a little bit by saying that we, Chugach, heard about the potential for a carbon project a number of years ago, and our corporation lobbied and worked with the local ARB and climate community here to lobby to have certain Alaska lands included in that program. And so I came on and started working on the project a couple years ago, and we put this video together, and at the time we were really thinking of it as an opportunity to market our carbon project. And as you'll hear, we also had a really interesting opportunity with that, in that we owned the lands and the coal rights in an area that had significant coal reserves and also is ecologically very important in Alaska. And so the video was made before we actually moved forward with a project. I'll talk a little bit more about what happened after that. If you want to go ahead and run the video, thank you.
We're an organization that has to look at developing our resources. We don't have a choice. We want sustainable use of the land, but we have to look at the economic interests of our people. Chugach Alaska Corporation is an Alaska Native corporation located in the south central part of Alaska, and we were established to perpetuate the natives of the Chugach region forever.
The Bering River coal field was discovered in 1896 when some prospectors were prospecting for oil and gas resources.
It's a known resource. We've known about the resource since we selected that land.
Through the exploration processes that have been over the years, there have been over 260 outcroppings of coal that have been identified, which is pretty significant. You could just walk right up to and see it right on the ground. Chugach owns roughly 73,000 acres in what we call the Bering River coal field. It's an area about 50 miles southeast of Cordova. It is bordered by the Martin River Glacier on one side and by the Bering Glacier and Bering River on another. The Martin River actually flows into the Copper River and the all-famous Copper River Delta, which is a critical habitat area and where our famous Copper River salmon come from. We own the full fee estate on all those lands, except for 11,000 acres that the coal rights are owned by another corporation. The coal is of high quality. All of that exploration has proven out that there is, at the low end, 59 million tons at a minimum, and potentially over 3 billion tons of coal in that particular field.
The earth is just bountiful there. We have to look at the protection of that as we weigh the development of it. That's our responsibility.
Rather than developing that coal through our firm, we are looking to sell it to realize the value.
Chugach is selling the coal rights to the Bering River coal field because we believe that it's in the best benefit for our shareholders. We look at each piece of land and determine what we think is the best value for that land. The area is highly vegetated. It supports a lot of wildlife habitat. We also have a significant amount of timber. There's roughly 9,500 acres of land that is heavily forested. It's old growth forest, hemlock and spruce. It's an ideal area for a potential carbon project, and that's another one of the opportunities we've identified should we choose to go with a conservation easement on the property.
And we worked hard to make sure that Chugach forest land was eligible for the California Air Resources Board program. For Chugach, we intend to be around forever. And so the ideal buyer for us is a buyer that has the same value system as Chugach, a buyer that has a balanced approach to ownership of a resource like this.
So, it's hard to follow that video. Absolutely beautiful scenery. The outcome of that project was that we decided to do a carbon project, and along with that project, we sold and retired the coal rights to that coal field. And we did that through a transaction with a project developer. We used New Forests. They've been excellent to work with. The Nature Conservancy, and then also the local Alaska Native Conservancy Land Trust. And so that allowed us to gain some economic value for our land, which is part of our responsibility to our shareholders. It allowed us to do this carbon project in a way that we highly value our lands, and we want to preserve those lands and assure that those lands are available for our shareholders for subsistence and other opportunities really forever. And it provided us with that opportunity as well to make sure that we're environmentally doing the right thing. And you saw in the video that that particular area is in a very sensitive region, and so we wanted to make sure that we're protecting those resources and doing our part. In Alaska, it's a little bit different. We extract oil and gas resources. We export those resources. That makes up about 90% of our economy. And so many of our jobs and economic benefits right now come from the oil and gas industry. So having that opportunity to look at these types of projects and conservation finance and being able to provide and see real benefits from those projects is really important in our state and to the Alaska Native people as well. And one of the things that we're really proud of with Chugach, we took the lead in pursuing this opportunity. And once we were able to get approval to participate in the California Cap and Trade Program, a number of other Alaska Native regional corporations, tribal organizations have also pursued carbon projects, and so that they're able to also benefit their people in the same way and preserve their lands at the same time. So we were just really pleased to be able to participate and be part of that.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's important to hear from areas that have coal resources or trying to figure out what to do with them while at the same time doing climate programs or responding to climate change. It's one of the things that we have to acknowledge in California. We can talk about going to renewables. It's a little bit easier for us to do it because we haven't been reliant on coal in the past. And yet we find regions around the world that have coal deposits who are still looking at climate change, reducing reliance on coal. What sort of debate was there on going ahead, however, with a program such as yours that was, looking to leave the coal in the ground, if you will?
There were definitely some people that weren't happy with the transaction. We had some shareholders who thought, gee, maybe if we developed the coal at some point in time, we could see more of an economic benefit. But we really believed that we needed to have a balanced approach, and it's our duty and our responsibility for prosperity, to make sure that we do the right thing for our people today as well as generations from now. And so even though we did have some debate and some pushback, our board believed it was the right thing to do. And we've been getting a lot of positive feedback from the transaction. So we all are extremely pleased to be able to do that.
Not to put you in a difficult position, but how can we work with the state of Alaska to get the state of Alaska to work more with our climate programs, or at least look at some collaboration with us? What's your relationship like with the state?
The Alaska Native corporations have a lot of influence with the state politically. Mm-hmm. Roughly 140,000 people in Alaska are Alaska Native, and our population is only about 700,000. We have a huge landmass, but not a lot of people. And so the Alaska Native corporations, there's 12 regional corporations, actually do have quite a lot of influence. I think it really comes down to making sure that we're at the table. It is really important as the indigenous people that we have a voice, that we speak up, and that we're heard around our concerns and our protection of the lands, protecting the natural environment and wildlife and habitat is extremely important to us. So we continue to have those conversations at the state and the federal level as well whenever we can.
Well, let me turn right now to Ray Williams, who is the Director of Long-Term Energy Policy in the Energy and Policy Procurement Department at Pacific Gas and Electric. I understand your current scope of work includes federal and state greenhouse gas policy, as well as policy matters addressing combined heat and power procurement. And you've been at PG&E since 1981.
I don't want to really admit to that.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I was working in the first Brown administration in 1981. So I take great comfort from finding people who were working at the same time as I was in government. But we can't do it alone at the government level. We need to work out with, to reach out to other governments, but also we need to work with our utilities, our businesses. Could you tell us a little bit about what's going on at PG&E and how you're proceeding these days, even though you don't have a video? So
no video here, and I would say PG&E is a very different place today than it was back in 1981. So I generally work in the policy realm, and really what I want to do is to step out of that and talk about what PG&E is doing on climate resilience, sustainability, and then in support of California's GHG reduction goals. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the company, our lines of business include electric generation, electric and gas transmission and distribution, and electric and gas procurement service. We've long supported California's efforts to combat climate change. We've supported many bills over the year, from AB 32 back in 2006. I think we might have been the first business to come out in support of that bill, to SB 350, and more recently, AB 398, and its very important companion bill, AB 617. Climate change affects all of our lines of business, and we are engaged. To help meet this, our mission really is to help the state meet its GHG reduction goals and do it in a way that's affordable to our utility customers. Let me talk a little bit about resilience. We're working to build our climate resilience capability. Through changes in our investment plans and operations, we need to adapt to changing climate and weather patterns. We've identified 6 climate drivers in PG&E's service territory: rising sea levels, major storm events, increasing temperatures, heat waves, wildfires, drought, and land subsidence. We have a very diverse service territory, and we see a lot of different impacts just from the changing climate. It's quite a list. So we're really working to leverage the best science, and it's a developing science today, to bring new information into how we plan and invest in our assets. Locally, we've instituted a Better Together Resilient Community Grants Program. This is a $2 million program offering grants to local communities. It focuses on resilience, and it prioritizes disadvantaged communities. One example, working with UC Merced, we're looking to accelerate the pace and scale of forest restoration in Calaveras County and focus on improving drought resiliency and reducing high-intensity wildfire risk. There are other examples as well. Turning to sustainability, the company internally recently instituted a 1 million-ton challenge. This is a 5-year plan to reduce greenhouse gas in its own operations. There's 4 elements. One is to save energy, reduce the waste stream and water use in our facilities. Second, one that you're probably quite familiar with, is to reduce methane emissions from our gas operations. Third is to improve upon our already clean fleet of company vehicles. and then lastly, it's to adopt more environmentally responsible products and services. As an example, it's to phase in SF6-free equipment as we turn over our electrical system. We're also ramping up our clean transportation program. PG&E's electric supply conservatively is more than 70% GHG-free today, and at this level, GHG emissions are about 60% lower with an electric vehicle than they are with compared to a gasoline passenger vehicle. We know that there are insufficient EV charging stations today, and to support the governor's goal, we need to move from about 5,000, which is where we are today, up to about 100,000. Our next steps for us is we've launched an EV charging program to build 7,500 make-ready installations. These are level 2 installations with 15 to 20% of those in disadvantaged communities. We're also looking into renewable natural gas for heavy-duty vehicles. This can have, at least in a transitional sense, the dual benefit of reducing greenhouse gas and improving air quality by displacing diesel fuel from trucks. PG&E also supports efforts to reduce greenhouse gas. I'll talk first a little bit about renewable natural gas. In our support for SB 1383, which is to capture methane and bring it into our pipeline from egg dairies, we're really working with dairy farms to make this happen and to find good markets for this methane. We're looking at other sources of renewable natural gas, seeing what we can do to scale those up, bring them into the pipeline, and bring them to markets where they displace a higher carbon fuel. Finally, I'd just like to talk a little bit about markets. PG&E, as you might imagine, has long operated in gas and electric commodity markets. We're comfortable with these markets. We certainly see the benefits of overlaying a carbon mark on top of, for example, a power market. We see integration in the Western United States as being a nice way of finding an additional market for our solar generation when we have to manage the duck curve, and also to encourage the rest of the West to build wind generation, bring it into California, or to use it for their own purposes. In this way, not only are we able to effectively reduce the cost of getting these GHG reductions in California, but you can reduce the carbon intensity of the electric supply across the West. On this front, we've worked with our friends at AIDA, most recently in Mexico, sharing our business experience as they are considering measures to reduce greenhouse gas in that country. And we've also, at the invitation of the Environmental Defense Fund, had discussions with China's National Development and Reform Commission as they looked at power markets and carbon markets as ways of reducing greenhouse gas in their electric supply. So those are my comments. Thanks for your time.
Well, thank you. As an attorney, they always tell you never ask a question if you don't think you know what the answer is going to be, but I'm going to violate that rule. When you were at PG&E and people there was a discussion of having a 33% renewable target by 2020. Mm-hmm. And you were at PG&E when this was being discussed in the mid-2000s. What was your reaction? Did you think that was a feasible target at the time?
Well, I think when you're a company and you have a commercial obligation to comply with the law, mm-hmm. you're going to work your way backwards. You're mm-hmm. going to say, okay, where am I going to get the sources? how much is this going to cost? How am I going to integrate it into my portfolio? So you come at it maybe from a fairly critical perspective. I think, once you get into the practice of, okay, I can figure out how to do this. I can get these contracts. I can work them into my supply. I can maintain my cost structure. Then I think any company becomes, a lot more supportive of goals like that. So it's just a matter of getting, I think, into the practice and being successful with it.
Okay. Well, we've got a couple of minutes left for questions. I don't know whether anybody has any questions for the speakers on the panel. If there are none, then right in the back.
Thanks. Hi, this is a question for Josie. I was curious if any consideration was given to a carbon multiplier, given that you were not only sequestering carbon through the conservation of the forest, but also keeping the coal in the ground.
Yes, so there were two additional advantages to that. One was that we did include as part of the transaction the sale of the coal rights, and there was a financial benefit related to a payment for that as well in cooperation with the carbon project. However, there's also tax benefits that we are going to be able to realize from that in the way of a net operating loss. So in other words, what we sold the coal rights for is less than what the value of that coal at the time of conveyance. And so it's helping our corporation in terms of that lower tax basis.
Question in the back.
Yes, again, in the same vein, what did it mean for development of jobs directly related, not indirect, to the Native communities? Because, back when development possibility for Native Americans were limited largely to casinos, it was better than nothing, but it's not. Has this generated, because you can do this far away from things, has it generated jobs for forestry people, for scientists, for basic engineering that you need around this?
Yes, thank you for that question. One of the things that was really important to us as we looked at doing a carbon project, we actually put 115,000 acres of our lands into the carbon project. That had previously been slated for timber harvesting. So we still have to manage that program, and so we required our developer to hire some of our Alaska Native shareholders to work on the project. And we were very happy. We had our inventory last summer, and they hired 10 of our Alaska Native shareholders that were from very remote areas of the region where jobs are very hard to come by, and provided them with training. And then we have a nonprofit arm to our corporation called Chugach, and they hired Chugach to do all of the logistics and provide some of the forestry expertise on the program. And New Forests is working with them to train them to the point where once they are no longer involved in the project, we'll have that expertise on hand, and they'll continue to manage that program, not only for Chugach, but for some of the other Alaska Native corporations and tribal organizations that are doing projects as well.
One more question?
Yeah, just a question for Josie. First, congratulations. That's a really phenomenal accomplishment. About 54% of Canada's surface area is boreal forests, and Alaska is the only state that shares that. We're tracking now for about an 8 degrees Celsius warmer boreal, which is for Alaska, I think probably higher because you're even further north than most of Canada, which has some pretty devastating impacts. White and black spruce trees, which are the two most common and were in your picture, probably don't survive at that. And there's some excellent work being done by NASA right now in something called the ABOVE project, the Arctic Boreal Vulnerability Experiment that covers sort of Ontario to Alaska. This is a huge challenge in Canada, is the survival of that ecosystem. For Indigenous people and for all of us, it's a profound part of our relations, our commitment, multiple generations. How are you addressing the survival of the forest and the restoration and maintenance of ecosystems? And it's almost a conversation you can't have in Canada because it's so depressing, but I think you're showing some real leadership here. And any thoughts on how we work together to save that forest and how you look at it from a traditional perspective and from an economic perspective?
Thanks, certainly. One of the things that I think is so important about doing these types of conservation projects in Alaska and looking at climate change is that we are on the forefront of climate change. The U.S. is an Arctic nation because of Alaska. And so a big piece of it for us is being part of that Arctic contingent and the other Arctic nations as we work together to try to address the climate change issues, because they have similar challenges with melting ice, with the survival of their forests, and other ecosystems as well. And so one of the things that we're looking forward to is, as we do the carbon project, is providing us with a lot of data that we have never had before. And so that information then can begin to be looked at, and we can partner and work with these other Arctic nations and others, such as people with the types of forest issues that we have as well, to learn from each other and work together and really come together to address this, because as many people have been talking about today, this is a global problem, and we're only going to solve it by coming together and working together. So we do recognize there's a lot of challenge. We believe that we need to be at the table and be working together, and I think it's really exciting to think about the summit actually that's coming this fall, and bringing people back together and really remembering the goal and why we're here, and the Paris Agreement and what brought this all about, so that we can continue to energize and get people together and involved and looking at the science and the issues that we need to address. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's been very instructive for me to be able to sit here today and listen to what's been going on in Hawaii, to hear what's going on in Alaska, and I was pleased. I've been thinking about your answer to my question, and so to me it says, okay, if we set the target, they'll figure out some way to get there. So that's encouraged me to set new targets. If there are further questions about the Global Climate Action Summit that will be occurring in San Francisco, you can check the governor's website. There will be additional information. Let me just say that right now it looks like we'll be having 3 days of plenary sessions in the morning. There will be breakout sessions in the afternoon. But I also anticipate that there will be a large number of affiliated events concentrating on various themes such as ocean health, health generally, education, what we need to be doing in terms of scientific research, and then talking about the stories about what's going on around the world. So I look forward to seeing people at the summit in September, and I want to thank all our panelists for participating in today's discussion. So thank you.